I guess we could start. We're not doing Robert's rules or anything, we'll just start. But maybe you, everybody, since we're the camera is on here, maybe everybody could just say their name again, so they're familiar to the people who are going to be watching or who are watching. Okay, Tim? You want to
Sure.
start?
Tim Moore with the Global Park.
Gail Sykes.
Alice Reel.
Rick Pennell. Mike Marinelli. Tommy Wilson.
Okay, we're going to go through the minutes for a second, but I wanted to mention a couple of other things. Tish Gallagher wasn't here for the first meeting. Turns out she had a medical emergency. She's also not here today because of a long delayed and then rescheduled, trip that everybody's been doing since the pandemic, and it was, she couldn't change that. So she won't be here today either. I wanted Gail to mention about the class that she's signed up for. Because Tim was smart enough to ask about whether or not if more than 3 of us went to the class, whether it would be considered a quorum. And apparently it doesn't, since we're just going to the class. We're not going there for discussion among ourselves. So Gail, you want to mention that class again, just for anybody who didn't know about it?
Yes, it's through the University of Delaware Biden Center, and it seems like it's very relevant to what we're talking about. It's on sea level rise and resiliency and funding sources, and so I get their notices. I'm on the Planning Commission, and we have a lot of new Planning Commission members, and they had a class for planning commissions where they actually have a number of them. So I'm on their email list, and I saw this, and I thought it looked really relevant. So
Was May
Yes,
6th, is that right?
that sounds right. It's a Friday,
Okay.
and
So
I know Tish.
Tish signed up. I think, Tommy, you signed up too, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So if anybody else is interested, just email Gail and she can give you the details again. Has everybody had a chance to look over the minutes?
Well, the name of the course, by the way, is Creating a Flood-Ready Community.
Sounds perfect, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any comments on the meeting, on the minutes? No? Okay. All those in favor of adopting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? No? Okay. They are adopted. Okay. Today we're going to, in the interest of not reinventing the wheel, since in 2018, a lot of the things that we are hoping to address in the task force have already been studied through the previous task force, of which Gail was a member, and David, you remember, right? And Jeff Bergstrom was a member. So I thought that would be a good idea to just go through what the report found and the recommendations that they made and where we are with the recommendations and things like that. So David Athy, city engineer, is here to go through that with us. So David, the floor is yours.
Okay, quite honestly, other than just reading the report again, refresh my memory, 4 years, be amazed what you forget, but I did not really prepare. I mean, I could.
Okay, well, I have plenty
really
of.
prepare a formal,
Right,
and
yeah.
I'm happy to just kind of, look at each section and we can. just
Well,
kind of
hopefully
skim over
everybody's had
it,
a
or-
chance to review it before we got to the meeting. So I have a couple of questions
Okay.
based on the, starting section 2.0. Can you, and this comes from a base of ignorance, as somebody said to me today. The Delaware Coastal Programs, what exactly is that?
Can I suggest we go around and make a couple of introductions, because there's
Oh,
at least
sure.
one person I think who's probably, I might turn to him and say,
Oh,
so,
okay.
so everybody gets knows.
Marika Levine, I'm the city building and codes secretary.
Oh, great.
And
Okay.
Dave Akey, the city engineer.
I'm Kevin Donnelly from the Newcastle Conservation District.
Oh, okay,
O'Garrity, resident of West Third Street.
right.
And I'm Jeff Bergstrom.
City building official?
Building official, fire marshal, and Grand Poobah.
Yeah, you're right, exactly.
So as I understand it, what I was gonna say is Kevin, you know, former DenRec employee, so you may have, you know, certainly perspective as well. The Delaware Code, it's essentially a division or a section within DenRec. They are either, I don't know if it was solely funded, or actually both Jeff and Kevin were in this very room a few years ago. Remember, Bob Scarborough, the director, bought in somebody from NOAA, I believe. So anyway, they are substantially, perhaps totally funded by NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. And charged with, obviously, you know, mining Delaware's coastal areas. I believe they have purview over the Denier Center, which is that farm south of Dover, whose name is now kind of escaping me, but they have some land holdings as well. But my main involvement with them, well, two things. We're disclosure working for them contractually right now on a very high level hazard modeling program. I could talk about that later, but it was really through this Resilient Community Partnership, which I believe I mentioned at the last meeting. They got I'm sure NOAA funding for that, probably 2016, 2017 or so timeframe. The city applied for the partnership, which, as the name implies, it's not just a flat out grant, but you actually partner with the group. And in this case, and they were the ones who funded the study that you all have in front of you now, but they handled really all the public outreach part of it. Gail will, of course, remember Danielle Swallow, Kelly Valencic. They were the ones who really kind of managed more of the PR stuff. We handled the technical aspects of it.
Just as an aside, the land they have, is that for water retention or?
Probably, I would think more educational purposes. I'm trying, the name, Kevin, you know what it is. What's
It's the
the,
National Estuarine Research Facility. It's just south of the air base, not too far from the
there's a,
historic mansion there.
yeah, it's like Kitsummick Road, the road going out to Kitsummick. So anyway, it's a multi-acre
John
huge
Hughes
facility,
Mansion is back 5 years. if you know that.
but it does not have, to the best of my knowledge, any sort of a functional, like, you know, some huge retention area or anything.
Okay.
I'm sure they somehow acquire the land, and it is they can get, I'd say, easily 100 people at workshops, conferences, things of that nature. And I know, because they actually asked me to review it before they submitted it, probably about a year or so back. The public outreach, public engagement is pretty integral to their missions, educating Delawareans on what's going on.
I'm just going through the report as I read it, so anybody just jump in. I noticed that it said the Tyler River overtopped the dike 18 times in the 5 years prior to the restoration. Has it topped it since then?
To the
Jeff, do
best
you know?
of my knowledge, no. Jeff or Kevin would probably know better.
Found Flotsam or Jetsam or whatever that was on top of the Buttonwood Dike once, but it wasn't on the other side of it, so it got just that high.
I'm not aware.
Don't know.
Covered up one of our little stakes, and I was hunting for the stakes, so I saw it.
And that was in 2014, is that right? That it was rehabbed, whatever.
Just after the dike was paved.
Yeah, the dikes were reconstructed on about 2014, 2015.
Just after that is when I saw the
This-
stuff up there. But I think it was wave action from a large ship, which is I think, at a very high tide.
This is a question that I've gotten, not just from here, but from other people. What's the situation with the bulkhead replacement near the pier?
I'm definitely going to defer to Jeff on that one.
Let's see, permits approved, the bulkhead restoration, you mean right along Battery Park, right at the.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're just awaiting the fish to spawn, I think.
Oh, you have, windows where DenRec won't let you do work in the river.
So really, you've got a
Like
contract.
mid-March.
oh, the shad are coming, is that the thing? Yeah,
Alex,
the service ferry is, yeah.
and we're also waiting, we took so long on the permitting system that the contractor pulled his bid because it was 2 years old and he has to reevaluate.
Ooh. You think it'll be less?
Not in this one.
I'm kidding. I did not know that the Downtown Development District was involved in flood amelioration, mitigation. And does anybody else know that it is? I mean, when the Downtown Development District was proposed, I assumed it was, the only thing I knew of, that it was for how you can restore your house or even build something new. And is it well known that you can use Downtown Development District money for flood mitigation? Do you know, Jeff?
Is it well known? No, I don't.
Honestly, I think that would be a stretch.
Well, that's what
now again, this is where my 4-year lapse is gonna,
This was in
I hopefully we didn't, I know we included the DDD in the documents we reviewed. We were asked to cast kind of a wide net, and so this was one of the ones, and I know I mentioned, you know, some leveraging opportunities, kind of more on a public involvement. You know, if you're engaging the businesses, you can mention some of these things as well. But I hopefully didn't say that the DDD money actually could be used for flood mitigation. I don't think that's
Maybe
correct.
it was from the comprehensive plan that I saw that then, because I was quite surprised.
But it is mentioned in
Is it?
one of the documents.
Right.
I remember that.
I think it might be even in the, well, let's see where I have it here.
And I'm scanning the
Yeah.
DDD portion, it's on page 5.
Downtown Development District, residents will understand how to get information and about natural hazard events, and will have information about shelters and evacuation routes. Financial and technical assistance will be available to elevate or flood-proof buildings in flood-prone areas, according to this from the Downtown Development District. I just wondered if anybody had applied for that.
Sets forth. So, I think we're gonna have to take this very literally. It talks about the district plan, set forth goals, objectives, et cetera, with one of the objectives to, okay, this probably wasn't phrased very well, but financial and technical assistance, that somehow that would need to be provided to help facilitate the growth of the DDD. I'm quite certain, or at least reasonably certain, that those DDD funds in and of themselves, they're not intended for flood mitigation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I was surprised.
I don't think that.
So you think it's just to let people know how they can get money rather than get money? Because it says here, provide public awareness and outreach to current resident developers on flood hazards and sea level rise risks and flood protection measures. Anyway,
Right.
all right.
So that, again, it was more of a vehicle for outreach, education, things of that nature.
Okay. It also says something about plan for shelters and evacuation routes. Have we done any of that?
You're not on the
Evacuation
DDD
routes?
part
Our
anymore.
hazard plan does address it.
Hmm?
Along with the counties and the cities, all hazard plan address evacuation.
They do. Where would you find that?
So William Penn High School, they open up as a shelter.
Right, now you're telling me that, but would everybody know that?
I don't know if it's on the Newcastle County site or not. I'm not sure.
And since, you know, so many of our roads will be all roads will be inundated, you know, I wonder if the evacuation routes would be pretty important as well, I guess, you know? You have to take your boat to get out of here at that point, unfortunately, okay. Well, so why is the city of Newcastle emergency operations plan so toothless? Does anybody know why? I mean, I've heard it, you know, referred to very lacking in details and things like that. Are they working on that? Does anybody know?
It's reviewed periodically. I wouldn't describe it as exactly toothless. The mayor,
Well, that's where I read it somewhere. It says it's very generic.
it's generic, isn't toothless.
No?
The mayor has great power
Oh, so that's what the emergency plan is, who gets to make decisions? Is that what it is? I haven't seen it, you know? Is that what it is?
Yeah, well, that's a good part of it, and because you can't have a great debate when things are not going well.
For example, the mayor would be the one that would call for evacuations. It's communicated very on all the radio stations and everything. He would determine when the police and fire department were to go around and notify areas with loudspeakers up to date. I'm just walking through some of the stuff they did during Hurricane Gloria. And
Do they have phone number, like a phone number bank like MSC does, do you know?
Reverse 911.
Yeah,
So it's in the emergency operations plan for the city, it's spelled out with a whole list of levels, of different
Okay.
levels and how things work
Okay.
and with, logistics.
so it's
and-
more how to do things rather than what to do. Would you say that's correct for the emergency plan? It's not like an evacuation plan or anything like that. It's who's in charge, who says what.
Well, no,
I should have looked at it. I should have asked questions about it before I thought, I'm sorry.
Copy of the public part of the plan, and it's certainly, it does address what we have to do. We just have to go to high ground. When it's gonna be deployed. We should have plenty of warning, so.
Okay.
Is it on the city website?
I don't know, I don't believe so.
So we're in the middle of doing that survey that says if water will go through basements and things like that, right? And if their first floor
Not
is
in the middle
above the,
necessarily, but yes, we're well underway, or
Right.
that part of it will be underway. very
right. Is there anything beyond that that we need to do before we've done with our research?
soon. Yes, actually, if we can maybe back up a step or two from where we just were, when I said I didn't, I did again reread the report, made some notes of the 7 or 8, what I thought were fairly critical things. And one of those where, Alice, where you were just a moment ago, is the evacuation routes, Route 9 both ways. You got slip here among the first roads that go underwater. So if I may humbly suggest, that would be something that would need to be evaluated moving forward, absent, raising the roads. And again, DelDOT, maybe bring somebody from DelDOT in here at some point. To the best of my knowledge, they are looking up and down the coast at where their critical infrastructure is and what roads may need to be raised and this and that, multi-year, huge sums of money. But to answer your question, I wouldn't say that is the end all, but it basically will provide the specificity that we were lacking in this report, where the mapping we have, and it's in the appendices, I think was very useful to help identify the at-risk areas. But it kind of implied a specificity that we didn't really have, like, we were actually going structure by structure. Gold means it's going to get flooded in 2050, but with the survey work McBride and Ziegler is doing, and then the basement survey work in the houses that Tetra Tech will soon be doing, for all intents and purposes, yeah, that should really provide the data to really fine tune, these assessments.
So what will we do with that information once we have it?
That's a great question.
Thanks.
I know I think I used the term, I've been using it for years, and it's overly simplistic, but in some ways it may be correct. The fork in the road is, in my opinion, in Newcastle is going to have to do one of two things at some point in the future, is either raise those dikes again. It's challenging and it's costly, and as that may be, and also the gaps between the dikes, or this is very difficult to say, but future residents are just going to have to accept the fact that once in a while, water is probably going to be in the street, in the basement, whatever, and start taking measures now to mitigate those impacts. And so hopefully with the specificity of the data that is being collected, we can remap the floodplain, we can check where are the floor elevations with respect to the floodplain, are they high enough, are they low enough, where are the basements, et cetera, et cetera.
Can we,
One of the-
can we talk about the gap in between the dikes
Sure,
and not
yeah,
only raising the dikes or the possibility
Right.
of raising the dikes, but the fact that the gap between the dikes, which is the whole historic district, has no protection? I
It
mean,
would-
can that be a separate issue from, or a separate decision from raising the dikes?
Not sure the best way to answer that. I'm gonna answer it a different way. Raising the dikes without doing anything about the gaps in between them is pointless, really blunt about it, because the
They're more
water.
vulnerable between.
Exactly, yeah, all you're doing is transferring the low spot. So to do the dikes without doing, and I know it's the Strand, it's Delaware Street, it's Chestnut Street, and a
Harmony
few other- yeah,
Street.
I'm sorry, Harmony Street, right, some other locations.
Right,
And I believe I
Battery
described this,
Park and, right.
yeah, the battery, but that last meeting, that, one of the things that we looked at, and again, Kevin's also done a lot of work on this, Kevin, please chime in whenever you think it's appropriate. That we looked at, these gates that, would kind of sit like this, you can drive over them all day long, but when the flood's coming, you can raise them up, and that would keep the flood water out. Obviously, you're not traversing the road at that point, you can keep the flood waters out. But to raise the dikes without addressing the gaps in between, that has no real purpose.
To follow up on that,
Sure.
that's been a concern of mine, obviously because I live there on the Strand.
Mhm.
And what steps do you foresee getting that gap closed? I mean, there's access to the property, the land that
Right.
already doesn't have a dike,
Right,
the funding.
easements, right,
Easements,
access.
thank you, yeah.
Public, private, there's a slew of issues. Kevin, I am gonna put you on the spot now. You looked into this in like 2018,
Yeah,
right?
we looked into it and brought up, discussed a proposal in this room and to look at, an elevated structure along the homes of the Strand, and it didn't get good support from the community.
So what priorities do you see? What's first on your list to accomplish closing the gap? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, I mean, it's
But-
not my decision whether or not that gap is closed, it's the city's decision. Okay, and what I can do is assist in the funding and assist in the engineering, but I'm not the one who makes the decision to close the gap. Okay.
What about diversion of the water? Because I'm thinking if you could get it through the current dikes, but you could send it farther, inland once it's got to the dikes, no? Yes?
Yeah, where would you divert it to? Okay, that's the question, Alice. There's no location you can divert it to without probably flooding someone else.
Well, what about, now, I came here with the idea that there was long-term problems and fixes. And then there's a lot of short-term things that we're not doing. Number one, we don't clean the stormwater drains anymore. I think that's a problem. That should be mandatory. They should be open all the time, and they're not. And we have citizens that go out and actually clean the stormwater drains out during the storm so that the water will flow.
Mhm.
And these things have to be addressed. And that, and then the dikes, I know you gave a really good description of what the dikes do last month, but I still believe that if you dredge the dikes, they will hold more water as opposed to spread out. When the dikes spread out during these storms, they go to Van Dyke, they go to Wilmington Manor Gardens, and that's what we need to control immediately, control the water that comes during the storm, then look at sea level rise
Well,
in the future.
I was just going through this, but there is, actually, it's in this section here has all the things that were recommended, and that's, that's part of short-term and then long-term here, so, we could discuss that now. I just had a few questions before we got into that, that's all.
Go ahead.
I was curious about Delaware Street, because it says here we have an opportunity with the redoing of Delaware Street to do all kinds of things for the green, but did we do anything to make it, besides the drainage? We made drainage better, right? But I mean, we didn't make anything permeable or any new green spots or anything like that, which was the original plan, right?
By and large, no.
And that was because of lack of public support, would you say?
A lot, there was some lack of public support. Honestly, it was also a tough decision, I believe, on the part of the city council. What it kind of got down to, and Jeff, I mean, what ultimately got done, but I think it was like they can spend X amount of money. It was a pretty big, a couple of $1 million from like 3rd Street down to the river with all, the bioretention areas and things like that you're talking about.
Right.
Or since they were kind of optional, is not spend that additional money, but then go up to 4th or 5th Street because they need to be repaved too.
Right.
It's a tough decision. I mean, there's only so many dollars, and so I think it was, or maybe it was even more the latter than lack of public support. But at the end of the day, then no, it just became pretty much just a standard repaving project with a couple of storm inlets that some drainage.
There was a mention here of a monthly newsletter and website. Did that ever happen, or is that, it said we started a monthly newsletter and a website? No? Or for the task force?
The task force, I think, had, I don't know whether with DENREC, actually, the report is on DENREC's website. I'd have to go back and look again.
Okay,
That
but
was 4 or 5
I
years
didn't miss
ago
it.
what was
Oh, then,
done.
I mean, it was, no,
If
okay.
something was done, it was during the preparation of the report and pretty much went away when it was over.
And then the only other thing I have before we get to the recommendations is, what happened to the previous task force? They said we're gonna continue to, did it just fade away? Was it put together by the council just like we were?
Pretty much, I think.
And it didn't have an end date, right? Or did it?
Yes, this study had an end date.
Right.
And this is the result of the
Right,
study, and one of the recommendations is that there would be a committee that would continue the work based on what was done here in the recommendations. But this is it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a 4-year gap, but it's finally, finally got.
Right.
right, so
Because it says
so
it-
we're it.
yeah, the city will continue to host meetings of the task force on a regular basis after the conclusion of this project in order to move forward with implementing the project's final adoption recommendations. So that's us. Okay. All right.
With a bit of a gap in between.
Yeah.
Alice,
Yeah.
for David, sure, and King. So we're talking about the gaps. What about additional bikes? I know I mentioned it here, one through Battery Park. I'm not suggesting that, but what about additional dikes to help fill those gaps?
You're talking about for the gaps between the
Between the
dikes.
I would think that,
Well, but right now, Battery Park is the dike comes up and dies into the West 3rd Street down there by Marini's house and where the old battery was, and then it goes low and goes across past the house on the Strand on the water and doesn't take up again until we get to Plum Alley.
I'm talking about possibility of additional dikes being constructed.
So let's go back to, and again, I think I described this in some detail last meeting. So the dikes that are there now, for all intents, it's a trapezoidal shape, flat on the top, two sloped sides and then a bottom. If you wanted to take that, if you wanted to maintain that configuration with, raise them with earth, with rock, things of that nature, you of course have to raise the flat portion of it, and those, what are they, 2-to-1, 3-to-1 side slopes, do you remember? 3 to 1. Okay, so let's just say they're 3 to 1 side. Every foot you're raising the top of it, you're increasing the footprint 6 feet. So you go raising those dikes, say 2, 3 feet, you're now increasing the footprint by 18, 24, whatever, easy math, a big impact. So you kind of have the same situation then in the gap. Oh, and I'm sorry, then the other way to do it is you can keep the trapezoid the way it is and literally put up a wall. Some sort of a structural wall. It'd have to have bracing. It'd have to be, nowhere near anywhere close to being designed yet, but you just put up a vertical wall. Wouldn't look too good, but it would, save space. It would save wetland impacts, a lot of other issues that come with. So in a way, I very generally, and again, I know Kevin looked into this some years back, there may be some other options, but do you just kind of continue the earthen between the dikes, which is certainly a possibility, or do you put up some sort of a vertical wall?
And berms.
Yeah, where the birds.
Well, the berm is essentially a dike.
Yeah, it would be an
Now,
earthen.
I was gonna ask, what's the difference between a dike and a berm? Nothing
berms.
really.
Yeah,
Or
Yeah.
levy.
A berm is small.
Or a
scale.
levee?
yeah, two different ways to say the same thing.
I was
Right.
thinking that the berms don't allow water to pass both ways. They're just blocking.
You with a wall, and that's something Jeff sooner or later is going to chime into this, because I know it's one of his topics that Jeff and I have talked about these many times over the years. Also back to the, dredging of the dikes, storing more water, whatever. As sea level rise continues to increase, and something we took a shot at the ecosystem study that I think I mentioned last time, where we looked at, and I tried to explain this last time, if you've got a pipe that's draining the dikes, you need to have a fairly open end on the downstream side, or it's not going to drain. So the way the pipes through the dikes work, the water flows both ways. If the water's high enough in the dikes and low enough out in the river, they'll drain. If it's the opposite, they're going to come into the dike. So the problem could be, probably will be, as sea level rise occurs, you may sooner or later reach a point where those dikes aren't going to drain at all. And then you get another storm coming in, and it's got nowhere to go, and then you're into potentially pumping, a very costly pumping stormwater. I don't know anybody that,
New Orleans.
yeah, or like New Orleans or something like, actually, Delaware City actually had a pump for a little while. I see a couple of you. So I stopped myself before I said nobody in Delaware pumps stormwater, but I know they're taking active measures to get rid of it. Because pumping stormwater, major dollars.
They actually put in a new pump.
Did they? Okay. Oh, I thought they were just gonna get rid of it altogether, but
No,
no, all right.
Where are they pumping it? Are they pumping it from the inland out again? Or is that what they're trying to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
If they have a low spot, it's kind of the same, situation you were describing, that they kind of created a little bit of a low spot, and it can't hop over the wall. And I guess in maybe some tide events, it doesn't drain very well either. So yeah, it's right by what's the, very end of Clinton Street,
Krabby Dicks.
yeah, Krabby
Back
Dicks.
behind
It's
it.
right behind there.
right next to the oil terminal.
Yes, yes. right next to the-
But the dikes have pumping stations too, or do they, or
In Newcastle?
no?
No,
They don't
So
build
what's,
them.
what is that at the, Broad Dike then, at the end of that? That's not a pump?
Yeah, what about
Those are tide gates.
It's a
At-
what?
Tide gates.
gates? Right down at the gas station, there used to be Seni's gas station. It was Bill Hines Auto Repair, now it's a truck repair. There's a pump right behind that.
That's a sewage pump for those three.
That
properties.
pumps back into the dike, right?
No, it's just a sewage pump for sanitary sewer, and it pumps into a sanitary sewer up on 60, St. Peter's playground.
So there's no pumping going on in any of the dikes?
No,
What's the pumping station they refer to here every now and then?
We have we have 2 sewer lift stations for Newcastle County sewers themselves. Big
Ah.
one is the one at the foot of Bull Hill, and one of them at, in front of the liquor store on West 7th Street.
So what do they do? What do they pump?
Wastewater.
Wastewater,
Sewer.
sewage goes downhill. It used to go just out into the river, and now it goes to a pump station and pumps. It's a lift station, and it runs by gravity to Wilmington. And
So we send our sewage to Wilmington? Is that right?
Almost did.
Everybody
I mean, I
that
like it.
does.
Yeah, there's another big one.
And the big wastewater treatment plant.
Ah, yes, uh-huh. Right.
Everybody in the county pumps sewage. to-
I see.
Okay. So we're almost there.
So there, that pump is what I think that somebody was referring to down, it's by the dike, but it's not for the dike.
Unfortunately, we pump a little bit too much stormwater out of that pump, but we could try stopping cross connections all the time, lining sewers and keeping out the bad guys. We'll be pumping sewage here if you want to keep the town by 2050 maybe. It's just a matter of,
You mean water? You said.
I'm sorry, we're
already
pumping
pumping.
stormwater. Stormwater, because as the dikes get higher, the other thing is we have so much aerial flooding here that we're the lowland, so all the stuff coming mostly from Newcastle County is coming down into the city, and we have to get it out in the river.
Oh.
So if we wanna, I suppose we should selectively retreat from part of our buildings, but right now there's 370 or 75 buildings in the floodplain, and we're gonna get another 250 in by whenever the sea level goes up 2 feet. So, since I've been here in 30 years, it's gone up 4 or 5 inches, but it's going up faster now, so we just have to see how it's gonna take. Eventually, if you get too much stormwater coming back, you've gotta get rid of that out of your ground from the the stuff coming overland, or if the seal gets
You mean
too
from
high.
stuff from the rest of the county coming in toward us, it would be
Well,
flooding that way?
Well, yeah, that's where water runs downhill, so if it's higher over by the airport, the water's gonna end up coming through Newcastle.
But we're not talking about right now.
It's worse every minute, but only very little bit.
Is it really getting worse every minute? I don't. How much has the river high tide risen in Newcastle over a 5-year, or 10-year, or?
In the 30 years I've been here, about 4.5 inches.
I don't.
So well, I'm sure Denmark probably publishes it. Again, a little bit of personal opinion here. I think what I've read is, and I think again, might have said this last month, it's a double whammy. The sea is rising and the peninsula is sinking. So the
Right.
land is still,
Did
it's
see
both
that.
happening at the same time, but
Right.
the projections, as I'm understanding it, the 2 foot, that's just if things stay the way, the rate kind of keeps steady. But as Jeff alluded to a moment ago, I mean, that rate is actually increasing. What the exact number is, I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to maybe do a little bit of research.
Well, let me ask you
on the next
this.
meeting.
Does the evaporation of the global warming, does that have any effect? Does that counterbalance the sea rise? Because you're looking at rivers right now that are much lower than what they used to be. For example, they just did the list of rivers that are in danger
Right.
of drowning up came out today.
Right.
Doesn't that compensate in any type of doomsday situation? I
I mean, are
just,
those rivers anywhere near here, or is that stuff like
Well,
Rio Grande or
well, you
something?
got one right out here that
Delaware?
hasn't changed in 50 years.
We just said it was up 4 inches though, right?
He said it was up 4 inches. I don't believe it.
Well,
I'd like to see some measurements. I'd like to see
Okay.
where the state of Delaware said in 1959 at Reedy Point, I'm just
Okay.
given a place where there's a lot of shipping,
Right.
that the high tide was 1.3 above low tide. And is it, is it 1.8, is it 1.9?
Okay. I'd be happy to do a little research.
Yeah.
But that's
If you
sort of
could.
the basis of our task force though, isn't it? I mean, if there's no sea level rise, or if you don't think there will be.
Yeah.
it's not all intuitive. I mean, Greenland Greenland and Iceland are both in big hurt because their land is going up, but some of their harbors are, even though all that ice is melting off them, the water is ending up in way different places because their land is rising so fast because it doesn't have the burden of the ice on it. So they're hard, the fishermen can't get back to their docks. It's getting tough.
So I don't claim to be a climate change expert, but as I'm understanding, it's the biggest problem. It's not, impacts are not gonna be the same everywhere. You're gonna have lessening some places and worsening in other places they can be temperature, it can be water, it can be whatever. And unfortunately, and again, this PhD level kind of stuff, the Atlantic is not a great place to be living in the era of climate change. It's just the way things are. It's the, I don't know, it's the ocean currents, whatever. So does one compensate for the other? Honestly, I'd probably say it'd be the opposite, is the fact that like Colorado River's draining and Lake Mead is, I was in Lake Mead 10 years ago and saw that, 30, 40-foot drop, whatever, and it's only increased since then. That could actually be making the situation in the mid-Atlantic worse.
Well, I thought we could go to the portion here, recommendations. Maybe we could go through the recommendations and see where we are with those and if it's something we can.
Page you want out?
This is one, it says,
27.
yeah, this is the adopt land use policies and strategies that would guide growth away from high-risk areas. Ensure technical expertise on team reviewing city's comprehensive plan update. Well, we already did that, so such that can be impetus for appropriate policies. Do we know exactly what sections of the code or anything like that that we would need to look at in order to do that through the code? Does anybody have any idea?
I mean, I think it would be an effort with, I don't know if it would be David or Chris Rogers, to look at the code and see if there are places where it should be updated,
There,
zoning.
and then I think
And-
Jeff needs to be
and
on that
Jeff,
list,
right.
but my personal opinion is that the city has a pretty good code right now, but that doesn't mean, and again, you said you're working on your CRS report today, so that includes, code is a big portion. Like the city, great is Freeboard, let's say you have a foot or a foot
Foot
and
and
a
a
half.
half.
What is
Freeboard.
exactly a freeboard? Is that the ceiling from the,
How far you have to build the floor of the building above the base flood elevation.
Okay.
So a lot of, the feds make, if you're gonna buy the flood insurance, you've gotta have your floor at least even with,
right.
so we're a foot and a half above that, so you might
So
not
your-
lose the
Your
structure.
first floor would have to
The first
be
floor
18
elevation,
inches above the floodplain.
yes, at a minimum,
Okay.
Margin of error.
any time you wanna go higher than that, that's wonderful, but
Right.
if people don't like the extra steps walking there, you should have seen the deal in Rehoboth, when they.
Well, actually, that's exactly where I was going, was the city could have opportunity, I'm sure Chris could take a pretty good shot at it. Again, I would suggest Jeff be part of that, of should the city start going above and beyond some of the FEMA regulations. I know I mentioned this at the last meeting, probably at the very end of it, that there are, kind of the NRDCs of the world and Natural Resources Defense, are bringing suit against FEMA. They're saying you guys really need to be looking much farther, longer term of what some of your regulations are. There is not a thing in the world stopping any municipality like Newcastle from adopting more stringent regulations. You just can't adopt lesser regulations.
Well, actually, I was thinking about that too, because if you adopt more stringent regulations, and you apply them to people who have already purchased properties and,
That's called grandfathering. You can't make something.
Right,
retroactive.
so for instance, behind the senior center, that area there, if you were really going to discourage construction, in a flood zone or whatever, you would leave that property off of it. But we can't do that because it's already purchased, right? And it's already got a permit, I think, doesn't it, Jeff? Majority property behind
Not,
the
not
scenes
to be developed, but he did get a permit to sell it.
to fill it, right? But he hasn't got a permit to, what I'm wondering is, would that be considered a taking of the value of the property if you change the regulations?
What would you think if you were Mr. Major?
I would think it was.
So we're talking about planning. I mean, planning and I put 613 regulatory, because you need to change the code. I think those go together, but it would be for,
Forward.
yeah,
But
forward.
a lot of the land that would now, here's my concern as a lawyer. Getting sued by property owners that their land is now much less worth a lot less because we are now redoing the code and, you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. It's
I'm nervous
extremely
about
valid point. Yeah, no,
Um,
I'm not disagreeing at all.
yeah,
I'm not sure a freeboard requirement would lead to a lawsuit. It just makes it more difficult to develop perhaps. I think the takings is when you do things that are so extreme, you literally cannot develop. And I don't think I would be any sort of proponent about that. However, thinking out loud a little bit more, and I can, and Jeff, again, I'll ask you to correct me if I'm not correct, if I'm wrong about this, like where I live in Newark, their flood, the base flood elevation, again, that's not a tidal situation, it's a riverine situation, so definitely different.
right.
But regardless, the city of Newark created a zoning district for that flooded area that basically says you can't build anything here. You
Yeah,
know, a playground or something.
that would obviously be optimal.
So, but I believe Newcastle, it's more of like an overlay where what's, you can have like an R2 zone or something with the floodplain and it's, you can still develop in it if you meet certain objectives as opposed to not being able to develop on it at all. Now, that would be a tough step. I don't know how many years ago Newark put that into place. It's been there, many, it's nothing new.
Yeah.
Been there many years.
Yeah.
So that's an option.
Well, considering the fact that, that Riverside there with the Garrison and I think, the original plan was to make that, well, maybe it still is, a downtown gateway and redevelop it with all kinds of malls and everything. And that's certainly 7th and Washington, that's one of those inundated, intersections, right? So I wonder, how did the Garrison, I mean, sure they have the 18 inches and everything. But there's no restrictions on the amount of
Closer to 18
concrete or
feet,
anything,
actually.
huh?
Closer to 18 feet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one that's way up in the air, right?
But there was no restrictions on the amount of like land you can cover with impervious, like concrete and things, right?
Yes, but the city's fairly generous. We're at the edge of 150 square miles of tidal floodplain, so no matter what we do in our little town, as long as we're not impounding water from up above, we're not gonna hurt anyone by the very nature of the built activity that would raise flood water, because we won't be able to measure the impact that it's filling our floodplain has.
Oh,
Only if you just surrounded someone whose property was running down and you just made a pond on somebody else's property.
wouldn't you be able to find that out for this study you're doing though? You know what I mean? Like,
Yes. Kind of to echo what Jeff said, it's a little bit of a misperception, so maybe talk about that for a couple of minutes. I'm basically gonna repeat exactly what everything he just said. You could fill the entire city of Newcastle, literally, and you're not gonna raise the elevation of the Delaware River, or if you do, it's like this much. I mean, it is so infinitesimally small. So what you all need, it's the elevation. What is are you above it or not with your built environment, your homes? And again, if the homes, your floor elevation might be up here, but maybe you got a basement and your flood elevation somewhere in between the two, back to the very first scenario I laid out a little while ago of it, sooner or later, you might need to do something, either protect that basement from being flooded, dry flood proofing, even though it's a residential use, that may need to get changed at some point, or the wet flood, just put in the flood vents and just don't have finished basements.
so we don't have a lot of water that's seeping into the ground, it's because our water table is so high, is that what you're saying? Because you say that won't change water won't go into the ground here, right? Because we're so low, is that
Yeah,
true?
okay, I didn't mean to imply that.
Oh,
You don't
okay.
have great, nowhere in Delaware does, or little, it's not well, I should say, down at the beach where there's a lot of sand, you
Right,
can get a lot more infiltration. Newcastle County,
Yeah.
not really.
okay,
When the
so-
trustees put the library in and put those wells behind them, those 30 wells for their
Mhm.
heat pump, 400 feet of the most beautiful red clay you ever saw. So there's not a lot of recharge going
Yeah.
on, at least in that part.
Yeah. I'm familiar with that, yeah. Does anybody have, I don't want to, be the only one talking here, so anybody please jump in. On page 28, community engagement. Well, this is what it says, transition flood preparedness task force into standing committee with long-term role in advising city on future actions. We have, that's, you're saying we did not do that, right? Continue to refine community rating system. Are we the best we can be in the community? What do we have to
But
do?
we're not so bad,
No?
considering all the mechanisms you
This
have
is for
in
the
community
insurance.
rating system, and that's just a mechanism to lower flood insurance rates.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a staff of what? A 20th or a 50th of me, and that's all you got. So, and you have to come up with a new plan to just change with their rules to make sure Newcastle County, for example, is it's like class 6 and we're class 8, but they've got from time to time dozens of people working on this huge amount of stuff. I don't know how many flood properties they really worry about in Newcastle County, but it's 400 or 500 maybe. It's not a lot. Right. And we've got 371 right here with another 250 coming with the next 2 feet of sea level rise.
So we have majority of buildings that are in danger from flooding?
Well, the
In New
kinds of
Hampshire?
danger for flooding around here, yeah, we either have to do something or we're not gonna be here. It's not like we're Slaughter Beach that just isn't gonna be there, but you know, you've got to do something, and you're gonna have to think about whether you have a belief or not, you're gonna have to think about pumping, you know, at some time, and that calculus is beyond my skills, but it's something around 2050, 2070. Remember, the same guys that built these dikes at the same time with the same technology have been pumping the water since 1650 over in New Zealand, over in, you know, across the river from Amsterdam. So you've got to, it'll come to us. We're just going to be hired. We'll have to figure out if we want to, if you want the land to reclaim, you could build the land, or you can pump the water out so that you can enjoy the land right the way it is. It's cost of doing business.
Okay, this is kind of over the top and just spitballing, but, and I know I said this before, but water retention. Is there any way that you could like drill like tunnels that could be filled with water underneath and, you know, and then they would close up, they would only have water coming in, and then they would close up, and then when the flood was over, you would open them up. I know that, like I said, it might be over the top, but I'm just looking for something, you know.
Sounds like quantum physics.
What I would say to that is, I lived in Connecticut, and the water came up Flower Street, and I would say to this gentleman, in my time, living in the community I lived in the Long Island Shore, all the boatyards had to raise the base level of their yards by bringing in gravel, because spring tides every month were flooding the boatyards that had been there for hundreds of years, some of them. So sea level rise has caused problems along the North Atlantic shore now for the last, say, 20 or 30 years, most noticeably probably the last 10. Bulkheads are overflowing that never overflowed before, but they're overflowing monthly. Around here, the ferry cutoff, that seems to flood every time there's an inch of rain. And it goes down to one lane, and I live on Wilmington Road, and it backs all the way up to the end of the city limits there by Buttonwood, where I live. So I don't think that happened all the time.
Remember, this floor we're standing on, it's just maybe a foot over base flood elevation.
But going back to your question, I say to people, and I moved from a flood zone to a flood zone. That's the Atlantic Ocean up there. You're not going to bury it somewhere. You know, it goes from Antarctica to the Arctic.
And I've sailed a boat to Bermuda, when you're out in the middle there, it's not, 70% of the earth is water, we were told in grade school. You're not gonna hide it anywhere. So what we're dealing with are two things. One is the heavy rains that do flow down from the uplands and get caught here if we try and block them from going into the river where they naturally would flow. So that's what he's talking about by raising the dikes and not having water go through, then you have to pump it out in a rainstorm, but if the sea level's rising. We all have our doubts about the future, but if it is rising, and we read these reports done by brilliant scientists with a lot of studies, it's hard to say that it's not gonna rise. So there's no place you can put it.
What, are you sure? Because, you know, when you talk about the water coming down, you know, you're absolutely right, but it used to spread out a lot more up river because there were the developments, right? So it had a lot less water coming down. So they were putting it somewhere up there. I'm just saying, like, as an alternate, putting it somewhere here.
Yeah, if I may. So let's distinguish flooding, floodplains, et cetera, two very major, riverine and coastal. And in Delaware City, I think you're fortunate enough, you kind of get both, because the Delaware River could, you know, you have a huge rainstorm in New York and sooner or later it's gonna come down the river. But exactly to your point, Alice, if you're upstream and you're only dealing with the rainwater to collect, sooner or later, yeah, you could spend enough money. It'd be, you know, really, really expensive. Theoretically, you could build some sort of a tunnel or these detention ponds that are ubiquitous. There are hundreds of, a couple thousand of them in Newcastle County at this point. Every new shopping center, you're gonna see the dry pond or other measures out there. Yes, you could do that, but I believe to this gentleman's point, where I think Jeff made the same point, the Atlantic Ocean, or at least the Delaware Bay, you'll never build a tunnel big enough.
Well, let me ask you, when it's not raining around here, there is no problems with high tides. There's, I mean, you don't see roads flooding out. The problem we have is when we have a rainstorm,
Right.
we're not getting rid of it fast enough. It doesn't flow back to the river.
Right.
So should we be concentrating on how to move the water along as opposed to trying to keep it from coming at us?
I would like to suggest address, maybe not concentrate, but address the issues you're talking about because they're in front of you today. But I don't want to use the word concentrate, but it's kind of a short term, long term. You know, you're bringing up some certainly valid issues. We talked about, you know, them before. The storm inlets need to be maintained. Every public works department in the country knows that, and tries to play catch up. Yes, all that stuff should be done, but that, in my opinion, should not be done at the expense of looking at the longer term trends and ramifications of going on. It's related to two somewhat different things.
And I have to say, living where I live on the Strand, rain is not an issue, our stormwater. It's when the river comes over the banks,
Yeah.
you know, when the river floods, and it's happening a good 6 times a year.
Just from tides.
Yeah, remember
There's
October?
nor'easters,
From that same kind of water coming from north.
the river just rises and comes over the banks.
It's more of the wind pushing the water up the
High
Delaware.
tides,
Delaware
during a
Bay,
high tide.
high tides, time of the year.
But is it during?
A
is it
storm-
during storms?
A storm can play a part in it. But you're talking about the river being constant and you were having the effects of tides and wind continually versus a rainstorm, which is in my view, kind of a short term. Now, you're right about wanting to get the water out of the drainage ditches when you've got a low tide. Absolutely. And when there's a high tide or a very high tide and a storm, you're going to be raising the level of both aspects. You're going to have high drainage ditches and you're going to have a high mean high water from what I would say a nor'easter.
So let me ask you, if we don't have a rainstorm for 2 weeks, all right, summertime, that happens around.
Absolutely.
Do we see flooding from high tide during that period? Isolate that. Do you see flooding? from
What
high
I've
tide?
seen, when I've been down by Marina, I've seen very high tides. Right in the middle of the summer, it all depends upon the phase of the moon and winds.
But I'm saying most of our flooding and extremely high tides are directly associated with storms, nor'easters.
Usually, yes.
Yes.
It's a nor'easter or hurricane or whatever.
But you
Yeah,
can't
and the
have,
river comes over the banks.
Yeah.
you can have a conjunction of both.
You
storm
know, high tides.
and high tide. Which is much, and I don't disagree with you, you know, the drainage ditches should be cleaned out because when the water level recedes on the riverside, they'll drain faster.
Yeah, that's, you know, we did a lot of work with the battery and I haven't seen any high water in the Third Street area or anything since we've done that.
Right. Congratulations on that. That was great.
But, so I'm thinking if, my thoughts are, maybe we should be looking at other areas where we have to do the same thing. You know, put in new sewer runoffs to the river quicker, get it out of there at low tide. And it
So for us,
closes up. It
the
doesn't-
river's just coming over the bank. I mean, I know drainage is important. But, I mean, the river is just rising and coming up to our houses.
We're kind of putting more water into the river though, aren't we? And isn't that a worse hazard? No? I don't know.
A drop.
What Alice brought up originally about the places to store the water, I mean, on page 30, it says increased floodplain storage and existing stormwater system capacities depending on results of modeling. I mean, floodplain storage, isn't that creating ponds, lakes, whatever? In some of the retention ponds, yeah.
Yeah, C14 at the top there.
Yes, I believe that's what he's referring to.
But ponds are not typically constructed in the floodplain. Okay. Typically constructed in the uplands. Where the development happens, and then they collect the water coming off the building in the parking lots.
What are we
Then
referring to
release-
here with the increased floodplain storage? What does that mean?
Yeah, kind of honestly wish I hadn't. So now I'm kind of being, now I'm, I don't want to say I'm being hypocritical, but I blended, what I said a moment ago, we're really talking about two totally different issues. I kind of blended them here. That's what I, so it would, you know, kind of something, you know, increase the amount of storage you can get in the floodplain. I was not meaning to imply, you know, the Delaware River, because again, you can't build yourself out of the impacts from the Delaware River, but more of a general statement, the storm sewer capacities, things of that nature. It's something that should be done, won't have a huge bearing on the bigger picture, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. Sorry, that's not a great answer.
You know, I understand. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was waiting to get to I guess the 6.2 near-term sequential and try to understand. I mean, we have a couple of things going on with the surveys that are going on now, and we should have that data. I mean, it talks about, you know, doing cost benefit studies to, you know, so I still get back to what can we do about the gap between the dikes? And then another issue is raising the dikes. And so is there some sort of modeling we need to do to understand cost benefit or what are the steps to get to the place where we have some protection in between the dikes? And then what data do we need to kind of look ahead to see if maybe we need to raise everything at some point in time?
I'm gonna turn to you in a second. So forewarning.
Thanks.
So-
Go, sorry.
So, maybe I gave Alice a slightly misleading answer a little while ago when I said, once the surveying is done, Tetra Tech's been in basements, we would have all the
Right.
data. That is kind of to get to a decision point. Again, that fork in the road, kind of one of two very general ways. If one of those ways turns out to be, it's either not feasible, not politically acceptable, whatever, to be doing all this flood proofing, the structures are too old, they can't, whatever the reason, and raising of the dikes appears to be the only real viable option, then absolutely filling in the gaps between them. And that's when you would need, I hate to say there's more studies, but again, no one's even come close to designing this stuff yet, although I guess the district at least conceptualized some of it a few years ago, but
Yeah, but I mean, the people who lived along the strand, not everybody, yeah, but some of the people who live along the strand said, we don't want that structure blocking our view, and I understand that.
So,
You can't
so,
have it both ways.
you can't have it both
well,
ways.
so, I mean, the study that was done, so Kevin helped with a study just to understand, and it was just for really 5 properties. It wasn't like, we weren't looking at the whole gap. And I mean, the alternatives were a berm or walls. And our neighbors have all, except for one, have all agreed to doing a berm at this point. The wall was not as popular. And because the wall, you did some staking of the walls and how high you would have to be.
But does the
But-
one person not agreeing, does that ruin the whole thing?
For a berm, yes, but
It's
for a dike or.
for a dike or a berm or any sort of protective structure, everybody's gotta be in, or else you've got another hole. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge.
Is there any way, and I know, God, this opens up a political bucket that I don't want to open up, but is there any way to say, we're gonna put a berm down the entire riverside from the wharf north? We've got most of it done up by Bull Hill. That's a perfect berm up there. If we were to continue that all the way down and just say, we're going to put that behind the houses on the
I see lawsuits coming.
strand. Is there any way that could
You
be
could get an
done, or
easement.
could one
Or-
person
Do it.
say, no, you're not coming on my property?
Does the city have power right of eminent domain?
And I don't think unless we could somehow say that we needed to build a road there, then we have eminent domain to put a road in, but that's just about all we could do. I think we need some help from the legislature to increase the city's home mobility, to be able to do that. And we're talking real money, and we're talking a lot of time in front of your husband, I bet.
I mean, we have a whole,
Good question, but you know. I
Right.
think, in all practice, nothing's more sacred than property rights. And
Yeah.
so, and I accept that, I agree with that. So unless there's, a uniform agreement, I mean, I can't build anything. I can build stuff on private property. I'm fairly unique in that sense. The conservation district can do that. But in order to do that, I need permission from that property owner to say, yeah, you can come on my property.
and we've had meetings with Kevin, we've had meetings with Jeff.
Yeah.
We have a whole bunch of property owners who say, we need a berm because we're tired of getting flooded all the time. We need some protection. But we don't have everybody yet. And
Can you think of it as like an easement for, you have a utility easement, right, through private property? Couldn't this be like a public necessity to put a berm over there? I mean, then it would have, it would, like, not a eminent domain, but an easement.
The owner has the right to reject the utility easement too, it's not there already.
Mhm.
The utility easement isn't automatic either.
Right, I mean, you'd have to you know,
The
go
owner
through the
has-
whole
has to
thing.
agree to it.
Yeah. But
So we're also talking, you know, what's going on in 2022. Be curious what this conversation is gonna be in 2042. Public opinion might have changed, for all we know, the state legislature, because by then, you know, Bethany Beach is underwater.
Right.
And they may have gotten the, you know, home rule charter changed or something. I mean. who
And
knows where it's
honestly,
gonna go.
when we do have a flood, everybody, let's do something.
Yeah.
You
Maybe
know,
we should jump
and
on
then.
it.
Go
then they
to a
get-
meeting the next day with easements. and,
Right, right. Right. I mean, the Delaware Historical Society has the Reed House there. You know, they really want to do something. They want the property protected. You know, we're all in the on the National Historical Register. You know, we would like to see, I'm not gonna be there forever. But, you know, hopefully that house can go on, and it's been there for hundreds of years. and,
this will make probably the decision for everybody, but one of the recommendations here is provide incentives to homeowners and businesses to implement flood management strategies that would loosen the city's costs for disaster mitigation. So, you know, like low-cost loans or, you know, I don't know if you could have private public grant program to do that. I don't know if there's ever such a thing like that, would be money for people to, you know, protect their properties, since it was, oh, you're also protecting the city.
Oh, yeah, there's some background. We haven't touched upon this yet. I think sooner or later we probably will, but like at-risk populations, either elderly.
Yeah,
You
right.
know, whatever. We
Buttonwood
did do
and,
some mapping where we, did,
yeah.
I think we like of course, members, we're like in income levels. You know, we're all, you know, back to the emergency plans we were talking about a few minutes ago. Not everybody has a car. Not everybody's that mobile. And so that was, I believe, if I recall correctly, where that one came from is people that may not have means to really be.
Oh,
doing
okay, you're not
much.
talking about people on the Strand per se then, yeah.
Maybe not. I don't, again,
Yeah,
it was
but
4
still, I
years
mean,
ago, but I believe that's kind of what.
It's not just the Strand we're
Elderly,
talking
you
about.
know, right.
Yeah, that's true. The elderly on the Strand too probably don't have.
People with
cars.
disabilities, sure, they can live anywhere. Probably do live anywhere.
And you know, here's the other, 6.2, you were getting to go. Install water surface elevation sensors monitors to help predict roads or other areas likely to be inundated.
Yes.
That's what you want to do, right? Is that really expensive? Is that why we haven't done it?
I would say that would be one of your least expensive things. It would be a great idea. Back to the dikes and the marsh areas, that was one of the recommendations. I think, again, tried to explain this last month, back to my example of the pipe and water flowing both ways, this and that, where there are water level monitors all up and down the Delaware River. There aren't any in the marsh areas. So it's extremely difficult to try to model what future conditions are going to be. I think that would be something that could be done really pretty
So
cheaply and easily.
could that possibly trigger evacuation plans or anything like that? Or is that,
Certainly could. You may want to bring, depending on how long the committee is going to meet, what direction you all want to go in, bring Deladon in at some point. And I don't know if Kevin or Jeff is aware, but I know they have their own Office of Sustainable Roadways or whatever they're calling it. Pappas is
Slaughter Beach.
I'm sorry?
Look what they did at Slaughter Beach.
Exactly. So because they're your emergency routes. So that may be something.
David, who's installing the monitors now up and down?
I don't know. Well, maybe the Delaware coastal programs might be doing some. I know DelDOT. Help me, Jeff. At Slaughter Beach, don't they have monitors now?
Where they close the road, the one,
And they
the
know
first
when the
one that
roads,
goes, they
and
close
so
the
they,
road and
because
then they can
Slaughter
tell
Beach,
people.
they don't get out one of those two
You
roads.
only get
You're
out
not
this way,
getting out.
and by the way, you may not get out this way.
so those monitors could actually tell you, get out now before the roads are inundated?
They, it would certainly go a long way to helping, you know, you can project, and with, again, technology, you know, what rain events, you know, how many inches are gonna fall, whatever, you can see, this road, you know, water went up an inch in the last hour, we gotta get people out, like now.
Mhm.
So I believe that would be not only to help inform all these other decisions from the emergency standpoint. Yeah, I think that would actually be,
But I do something like that at Cooch's Bridge, right?
they maybe, I
Yeah,
don't
they,
know.
you get a warning on the tidal level.
The stream gauge.
Yeah,
Certain.
Now that you mentioned, DelDOT set that up a couple of years ago. I remember they had like an app. You could enter your address or
Yeah.
whatever, and they would say, yeah. They had
So
like-
maybe Delta can provide those monitors?
They would, maybe for the state roadways, I don't think they would touch the, the dikes, the marsh areas, anything, or, on non-DelDOT
Route
streets.
9, both ways, where those would, they're state roads, right?
That, in my opinion, is a very reasonable thing to be seeking. There are your emergency evacuation routes and everybody in the town, those are the first two places.
Our dikes protect Route 9 at 5 different locations.
Right.
The dikes are there right now mostly to protect Route 9.
Yes, but we know that their elevation is not optimal at this point.
So Route 9, south of Dobbinsville is on the tip in the transportation improvement.
The Wilmette.
Yeah, the Wilmapco, so but it's scheduled to start design a couple years out, so it'll be probably
8-10 years before it's actually
5, 6 years before it's actually built.
Probably.
But it's on there
All right, good.
with funding.
Should we live that long? Uh,
So, 641, kind of what we've been talking about, further raise dikes and or add additional dikes at Battery Park and Strand. And, it talks about, having to determine how many structures, cost benefit analysis, that kind of thing. So again, I'm coming back to, once we get the studies that we're doing finished, what else do we need to do some sort of an analysis to say, this is the direction we should be going?
Yeah, this one, a little more difficult to answer, and Kevin, I'm gonna look your way in a minute. Until we actually get the data on the basements, I kind of know what the survey data is gonna look like. But until we start plugging it into the models and so I don't wanna box myself into a corner, overcommit on, I'm just not totally sure how it's all gonna play out. I did mention this last meeting, hopefully I wasn't putting too many words in your mouth, but the district, I believe, has approached some of the legislators seeking some funding assistance. So I also don't know, how many dollars would be there to do some of this modeling. The cost benefit thing, we probably ought to talk about a little bit, and I'll be perfectly, I know the Corps got their own cost benefit. FEMA has their own, way of, these are like exceedingly complex. You get like PhD economists running some of these models. And it also gets into how does some of this stuff get funded. We haven't really talked about that yet. I think it's for, no way on earth. Newcastle is not going to pay for all this itself. Tens of millions of dollars, very doubtful. So if you're going to the state or FEMA or somebody like that, there's very often strings attached that they have an obligation, obviously, to make sure money isn't being spent frivolously, it's being spent on good things, i.e. cost benefit analysis. So some sort of an effort would need to be done to demonstrate. You won't be able to use federal dollars. You won't be able to use, say, $10 million of federal dollars to raise the dikes if you're only going to protect $9 million of property behind them. There needs to be at least a 1.0 or greater benefit cost ratio. You need to show that the money you're spending is going to either have a greater amount of benefits or protect things from being damaged. That probably wasn't, that was a rambling answer, but so there's still an awful lot going on out there.
But who,
But my recollection,
Okay.
when the state funded the 5 dike reconstruction projects, I don't believe there was a benefit cost calculation that was go or no go in making the decision to do those projects. Did that work?
I hate to disagree with a client, but I think I might have to on this one.
Okay, but I think in the end, the community, Newcastle's need to reconstruct these neglected, collapsing dikes was compelling enough And maybe the benefit cost was compelling enough.
There was a VC, I remember Bruce.
Okay,
I can
alright.
picture that in the report, so. Yeah, I think what you're looking for, and I'm not giving you great answers here, or at least on this one. If that decision point, and I think there really will be enough data looking at it logically, which way, are we gonna do the dikes, or are we gonna just try to do work on all these homes, businesses, et cetera? If that decision comes out doing the dikes, that's really where I think you're trying to figure out, and that would be some sort of a, getting into conceptual design. How, is it gonna be earthen? Is it gonna be a wall? How long is it gonna be? How tall is it gonna be? How are we gonna get the property? Who's gonna pay, whatever? And the real first decision there is what this thing gonna look like. Is it gonna be earthen, which is gonna have a huge, or big footprint, or is it gonna be some sort of a vertical
Right.
wall?
We're talking about, like Gail said, this CI1, and it mentions additional dike at Battery Park as a possibility. I mean, what would that look like? Would that be something that
That's why
separate
that's the question.
Yeah,
Is it a earthen
farm
dike,
or dike?
or is it an armored wall?
Yeah.
That has, as David mentioned before, you'd have.
I
to
mean,
have-
I picture, the
Support
Battery
behind it.
Park's got a berm running into part of it, and then it just sort of tapers
Mhm.
into the land. I picture in my mind just a continuation of the bump. There's one on the other end too, behind Bull Hill, that actually goes under the road. And you don't even know it's there because it's tapered.
Yeah, the dikes were built to 10 feet elevation, and where they taper in the Battery Park and in Bull Hill is where it ties into the elevation of the land at 10 feet or a little bit higher.
So what
So
I
just
see
feathers
is
in
just
it.
continuing that along.
That would
And then-
help a lot of people's view of the water.
There you
Not,
go.
well, it would be
Including
okay
mine,
with
and I live on
me.
West Fourth Street.
Well, what's more
I-
important? I think the question is ultimately, what's more important, a dry house?
That's
or
what
a
you're
view?
about to say, just because my view of the water would be a little less, doesn't mean that couldn't be done.
No.
But I do think
That's
that,
entirely city property.
yeah,
That
but,
might be an easy one to do.
right. But some, a lot of, I'm from communications for the last number of years, so I think about this in the way of, how can we get the city behind us, kind of, on this kind of thing. And I don't think the city, the people who in the city, I've heard them say, why aren't we doing anything about flooding? Not realizing that we're probably better than most towns on the river about what we're doing. And it upsets me that people think that nothing is being done, or, why should we do anything? We haven't done anything for 30 years, when actually we've been doing things for 30 years. So I would like, as part of it, to concentrate on outreach to the community, because maybe that way we get more people who will say yes to things, rather than no, like, just off the bat. So I'd like us to think about that in the future. I know there's a lot of recommendations here about that. And I wonder, Jeff, could you, if a website, could there be a website? No, I don't mean about you don't have to create the website, but
Alice, can I just finish?
yeah.
Carry on with what Gail was saying there about, so if there was a berm constructed all the way from the wharf, all the way to the other berm, down by the sailing club, say, what would that do to properties that aren't behind that? I mean, would that just push water around that?
Yeah, would Buttonwood get all the water?
I don't even that's far away. I mean, even the Strand.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and honestly, we haven't really looked at, we used the word like displacement or references to it a few times tonight. The water's gonna find its way in, and I believe what your question is, if you just build this, few mile long dike, is water just gonna loop around? It could, they would have to be tied in, what Kevin said a moment ago, to a high area somewhere.
Because we looked at that issue at Port Penn. Okay, there's an old dike built in the 50s by Beldot that fronts Port Penn. It's about 150 yards off of the back of the homes. Fish and Wildlife owns the north side, and the south side, there's a single private landowner owns it in the middle. And the folks at Fort Penn, when we did the 5 dikes up here, they were like, well, Why didn't you build ours? Why didn't you redo ours? I was like, I got money to do these. I didn't get money to do yours. I'm sorry. But we worked with the county and we did a flood analysis and, it's a real challenge down there is where do you tie, you were talking about the tie-ins here. Where do you tie in the end of the dike at a 10-foot elevation? And you'd have to go way inland. And you'd have to create a barrier across Route 9 there. And, that's a structural issue for Delta. What sort of flood protection do you build on Route 9, south of Port Penn and Augustine Beach? So it's a legitimate question, sir. That's what engineers and flood experts study when they try to design these things. A comprehensive flood protection.
Right, and how would it tie into whatever
How and
floodgates
where?
at Delaware
Yeah.
Street?
Yeah.
You had a berm coming from each side. I mean, I don't know, but
I mean, and
hopefully the engineers know, right?
We built Buttonwood Dike, and there's a tie gate at Buttonwood that was rebuilt in like 2010, 2011. But again, certain flood scenarios like you're describing, acknowledge and recognize, in the northeast or where water is pushed against the mouths of rivers, but yet rain is coming down those rivers. There's nowhere for it to go but overland into people's homes. And how do you protect under that scenario? That's the complicated issue, right? That's the complicated issue, especially when you think about the Delaware River, just the estuary watershed is 4,000 square miles. So you got a lot of water just coming down this river from Trenton south, and then the Delaware River goes all the way up into New York State. So, trying to manage that system is just very complicated.
So can you model that?
Yeah, you can. The question would be to what purpose at some point? You might have to focus more locally to get something that you can really use to protect this community.
I mean, how long are the existing dikes, the ones that we,
They vary.
They vary in length.
but they're all they're connected to one another, right?
Not really, no.
They're not really. Oh,
No.
okay. So they,
Got the gaps.
oh,
You got it.
okay.
And Delaware Street, certainly.
The entire roof would just be dredged another 30 feet.
Yeah, can we get like some big thing coming, just pick it up,
Fall,
pick the whole town, just like that?
The channel is what?
There actually are towns that have, more like along the Mississippi, small towns in Missouri or whatever, that literally after, 4 or 5 times, they said the heck with it. And they move inland a mile on higher ground and rebuilt their cities. Not Newcastle size necessarily, but it's been done. It's been done.
Yeah, the main channel of the Delaware River, the shipping channel, was, it was 40 feet, and then they dredged it to 45.
Yeah.
That was a huge.
If you dredged it
Well,
more, lower, would it
what
make a
made you-
difference in the flooding?
I don't think so.
yeah, a perfect example, you talk about the dredging. That dredging would take place along this Delaware River, once a year, once every 2 years, something like that. Now you're seeing dredging happening here multiple times a year, at least a minimum, at least 2
Oh,
or
it
3,
silts over, you mean? from the-
depending upon
The maintenance
where,
dredging.
for the maintenance of everything, just because of
maintain
how
that 45,
Mother
40.
nature is.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a never ending job now. When
Right.
they get done at this end, they
You just
start
start
again.
Right, and before it wasn't like that, you know what I mean? It wasn't like that. So I guess for me, I have multiple questions here.
Mhm.
One is, we talk about the dikes. I would like to know more about the dikes. I would like to know the operation of the dikes. I would like to know the maintenance of the dikes. Has maintenance been done? When were the dikes put in? When they were put in, they were constructed for the water flow or the water at that time. So depending upon when they were put in to now, you know, things change, right? Development changes, the coastline changes, so that all
You know,
ties
Tim,
in
I totally agree with you.
and
So I,
affects.
I was thinking like maybe next month, we could have Jeff come in and talk about the dikes. And maybe before the meeting, whoever is really wants to see what they're really about could meet you somewhere.
We
So
can take a tour of
so-
every.
And you
inch
could
of every
tour one of
So,
the dikes.
I have nothing against Jeff. Jeff and I get along very well,
But
but I would be more interested on the construction of it, like the people that designed it, the people that put it in.
Well, they
And-
did it.
well, they were in it 16, 15,
well,
right?
Okay, so, but they still they still build dikes today. So, like, I have nothing against Jeff, but I would like to see somebody from that point of view, because they might know some ins and outs
We can get you copies of the design plans. for all
versus,
5,000.
and, and all,
They're here.
yeah.
You can look at
that's-
them. We spend, did you know that we spend $25,000 a year trapping animals so they don't dig holes in
Yeah,
the dike?
so I,
Or $5,000 a year to just spray for Phragmites, so we can expect to tow the slope?
so in reference to the dikes and the, we call it the sluice gate, but the tidal gate at Route 9, prime example. Here, I happen to be working and we go down because one of the gates is open. Well, everybody knows what comes up and down this river, what objects
Right.
go up and down this river, and here this gate is stuck in the open position, not being able to work function properly. And there's a big tree limb that we couldn't even get out, and we went down to try to get that dislodged for it to work, you know, to work properly and all. So,
Right.
and that's the other thing is the amount of debris that comes up and down this river, it's tough to see it at a certain level, because when something's not functioning properly, you don't know until you see the back end of it, until, you know, you see that result of it, hence Route 9, you know, flooding like it does. I think one of the easiest things that the city can do at this time is a water gauge on a couple areas here.
A water gate?
Have a water gauge to be able.
Oh, gauge.
A monitor, and that monitor.
That's
can
what
be-
you're
can-
talking about, right? Yeah.
And it can be monitored, so like you can go on to like the US Coast Guard has a thing. That you can see every gauge, because I know during storms, that's one of the things that we do at the fire company. A few of us will log on and see what the gauges are doing, depending upon the track of the storm, what the gauges are doing up north. To see what it's saying, because we know whatever is up here, guess what?
How far north are you?
It's
are you
coming
looking?
here.
Yeah, how far
you know.
north are you looking at? And what gauge are you looking at? Is it like the Wilmington or
No,
higher than
north
that?
of
or-
Pennsylvania,
Ah,
because Pennsylvania flows down here
Right,
as
Sure.
well, it
Mhm.
affects us.
okay.
So it's just a matter of, although it's doing what it's doing here, and we may not even get the storm here in Delaware,
Mhm.
but if they have a storm up there,
Yeah,
you know, we're eventually gonna get that water, and it's eventually gonna affect us
Mhm.
too.
right.
With the stormwater goes out to the river. Some
And thence to the ocean.
and right hence the ocean. So, you know, with the stormwater, you know, do we get pipe scoped on a regular basis for maintenance in certain areas? To make sure that, you know, there's proper flow or the adequate flow that's supposed to be.
We monitor the stormwater system. It's like, pulling teeth to get the political will to
Right, I get
adequately
it.
even model our stormwater system. Right now, we're on a 5-year plan to try and finish monitoring the stormwater conveyance system. We've made a pretty good start. We're halfway there. I think we got another 4 or 5 years to go, but that's spending 15 grand or so a year. We actually could do it all this year, but we just can't afford to
No, and
doing it. And then when you model, and then when you take a look at what you've got, then you can see what your maintenance is good for, or whether, in some cases, it might just be purposeless, or systems might be rebuilt. The trustees did a wonderful job of rebuilding the worst pile of, stormwater, conveyance system we had through Battery Park, but that was a
Yeah.
very expensive project, but now it's working right there. There are plenty of other places that needs to be done.
And then the other thing that, it's tough to say, and I guess it's even tougher to hear from a person that, the only one that is on the committee that doesn't live in a city, is we talk about management, like, it's okay to manage, it's okay to do a bunch of to do what we can, but if we can only go to a certain point, then it's okay to accept we can only go to a certain point, as long as we're able to manage, keep it at that manageable level, so it doesn't get worse. So in reference to that certain point, so to do preventative maintenance to minimize the amount of flooding that happens, because it's so with water, and doing anything with water, it's so costly.
Yeah,
And all.
the only sort of fly in it is that it's changing. We can't just maintain because, the sea level is rising. So maintaining becomes not doing enough at a certain point, you know what I mean? So, but I know what you're saying, we're not, if we can't protect the city from flooding, let's say, we've got to minimize it, and
Right.
then what are we gonna do when it floods? Right?
Well,
That kind of
and,
thing.
and that's it. So Gary, I think you said it, you guys had flooding like six times roughly a year. So if things were put in place and it floods only 3 times instead of 6 times, like we're doing what we're able to do with what funds we had available. So we're able to do something, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I know it sounds crazy, but if you stop at 3 times instead of the 6 times, like, that's a plus. It's not a negative, in my book.
Incremental change,
So,
whatever, yeah.
yeah, this is it's a tough issue, it really is, just because it's kind of like all different directions, right? So if
Right.
it's not coming from the top, then you gotta worry about, well, is it coming from the bottom because it has no way out? So,
Yeah, we got,
it's kind of like what's
coming down river, up river, and across land.
yeah, because
all going
like
right here
it
in
dumps
Newcastle.
out, so once it gets so high, it's, there's resistance there, so it's only gonna go, it's only gonna go up.
Yeah.
Alice, I'd like to propose that we spend time, I'd like to propose that we spend time reviewing the recommended actions
Yeah.
and activities
Yeah.
in this vulnerability assessment adaptation plan, and then see what has been done, what hasn't been done, what can be done.
Or you're talking about the 6.0, sort of, that's kind of what we were
Yeah,
doing.
the
We didn't go
recommended-
after each individual one, but we
Right.
can do that.
Yeah, we've been doing it, but I think we should do an organized process, review that, evaluate what has been done,
Mhm.
what hasn't been done,
You're talking about right
what
now.
could be done.
Right. No, eventually, you
they
mean,
should-
like next meeting or something?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree, because like I said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
As David said, most of the research has been done, and it's not like we can come up with new facts. I wish we could, but we sort of know what the situation is. Wouldn't you say, David? Would you say that, Jeff? We sort of know what the situation
So,
is.
so these are good recommendations, but I don't think they quite go far enough, because I don't know what to do with them. I mean, I'd like to take the next step.
Well, I
Um,
totally agree with that, but I think we could start here.
Oh, I agree. These are
Yeah.
all good recommendations,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't want to spend a whole lot of time on community outreach. I mean, I think it's really important, but, maybe focus on, one thing and not everything.
Yeah, I agree with that, Gail. That's why I say just go through it and evaluate what is important, what has been done already.
Well, I guess, because, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I think communications is
Yeah, I mean, we have to
important,
start
but,
figuring out, you know,
not
what we think
not as important as taking care of properties or, you know what I'm saying? I
Right,
understand you're
and those
prioritizing.
are, right.
But it's
those
also
are
something
some
we
of
could
the-
actually do quickly.
Yeah.
You know, whereas the other stuff is sort of long-term and very expensive. And we've got to figure out how to do that in the.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what other steps would we need to really be able to, you know, tackle the gap and then evaluate how and, you know, for raising the dikes, how, when.
But don't you
How
think
much
we actually
money?
know, we just know that it's almost impossible to do? Okay,
I
no,
definitely wouldn't use the word impossible, challenging.
but I mean extremely,
absolutely,
extremely
expensive,
challenging
absolutely, but-
financially as well as politically. Wouldn't you
I mean,
say?
I think one of the things we need to understand is funding and, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about how we think Newcastle is a little bit ahead of a lot of other cities in thinking and trying to wrestle this thing to the ground and, you know, there is funding out there. So, I mean, I think that's one of our challenges is to find out, you know, what funding and what we, you know,
Yeah.
what studies we would need to pull together, what other data do we need?
Well, so that's what I'm saying. I don't think there's a whole lot of data that we have to pull together.
Well, that's what I'm trying, you know, we're doing the study now and I'm just trying to understand, would we need to do more modeling to say, okay, you know?
So,
And it seems like we're saying, I mean, I think we understand we have a problem and
so the
Would-
data,
No, please, Tim, go.
so all the data that we have now, what more data do you feel as though would be needed?
It's not so
from
much,
The data that has already currently been gathered.
it's not so much more data, but better data. This study and even a couple of the subsequent things that we did after it were based on, we did not have survey accurate information. And what I was gonna, would it be helpful? I'm a very visual person. If I just came up, you know, a couple of exhibits that would demonstrate what I mean by like these flood elevations, the flood proofing measures, just a sample. Okay, I may do that, because, you know, however you want to set your agendas for a future meeting, and maybe even some of the maps that we have at the back at the end of this report, I think were pretty helpful. That may help visualize kind of what we're going on. But anyway, so the work that had been done to date, we did not have floor elevations. We did not have accurate, at least, the adjacent ground elevations. And if you think about, I hate to ask you to do this, but what happens if the water comes over those dikes? Just picture it going through the Strand or whatever. You know, is it above the floor elevation where you're living? Is it below that, but still above your basement? And this is where I keep going to the flood proofing. You know, how would you adapt your? We don't have those numbers precisely. We had like general numbers. There is state what's called the LiDAR mapping. It's just they fly it. It's a very high level topography. You know, it wasn't bad, but to make these decisions, it wasn't anywhere near good enough. So what we're doing through two other contractors is getting that data. They are literally surveying the floor elevations. They are surveying the lowest adjacent ground. That's McBride and Ziegler, the surveyor, and then Tetra Tech, who's this, Layla's the historic architect in the city. They will actually be going into basements and assessing what is the height of the basement, is it finished basement, are there already penetrations, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
That doesn't really tell you anything about the berm or anything, though, does it? Or whether, you know what I mean? That's
Well,
that's
it
more
gives
like
you-
individual
I would think it would give
properties.
It would give you information, if we built the berm to X elevation. How
8.5
many structures would we protect? How many basements would we protect? If we raise the existing 10-foot dike 2 feet, all right? You know, Jeff is talking about the 325 homes that are in the floodplain. Do we protect all of them? Some of them? How many?
Back to the cost benefit.
So that, I was gonna say, that's a
That sort of
justification
level
for
of
that,
detail.
rather than whether or not we should do it, or.
So
how.
everything Kevin just said, but what if the dikes never get built? Then there needs to be also plans for, is there something that can be done with these structures? And I'm gonna be really honest, I mean, these are old, you know, ancient structures that weren't designed to have 3 feet of water against them
You're,
for
you're
several
not,
days.
you're not gonna raise them
that's-
up and put them on stilts.
No.
Right,
And
so
that-
can you,
and that's my point. That's
exactly,
my
but
whole-
can you put the vents in them or whatever
Yeah.
that would allow the floodwaters to enter? I'm not saying to be pleasant, but at least it beats the heck out of your your house falling down because the foundation just gave. So it would be for both, exactly what Kevin said, and that goes back to informing the benefit cost analysis. Before you get any kind of FEMA money, you would really have
Right,
to
you would
show
need to show that.
what you're
Okay.
either protecting or
Okay.
protecting, you're
Yeah,
not getting. damage.
floodproofing 300 homes is gonna cost you maybe X.
And has that process started, and how long does that process to be complete?
The data collection has started. It will finish sometime in the summer,
The survey.
the surveying, right? We
In
would need
reference to
another,
the
you know,
full
kind of few
elevations,
months to do
correct?
some of that. We're looking at like a fall deadline,
Of
or not a
tw-
deadline.
Of 2022.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I say, the timing of this committee is either perfect or like a month or two too early. But honestly, if you were here a couple of years ago, we don't have, we don't have any of this data. It was-
So-
Until we got the FEMA grant, none of this would be
And then
possible.
would you or be able to analyze it and come up with like this many houses or this many
That's
structures?
exactly what we're
It's
gonna
pretty-
do. I'm sure I'll ask for like,
Okay.
Kevin, and yeah, I appreciate it. Kevin and Jeff's help. I mean, I'm not gonna do this in a vacuum. We, again, fortunately with AECom, we're a huge company, so other resources I can call upon as well, so.
Would that determine how far, how high the berm would be at all?
You would better inform them.
Okay, because I was thinking we
So
could
you
start
could
to
say
look
at
at.
this height, you're gonna impact, yeah, at this height, you're gonna protect,
X
yeah.
percentage more homes.
I was just thinking if it was more like, if we did the berm like we want to do, we would, it would cost us much money. You know what I'm saying? And we could start to, even before this thing comes through, at least find out what would be involved in putting a berm all the way over there, and how much would it cost and things like that.
Maybe now's a good time, I believe, I gave it to Susan Souter before the first meeting. I'm not sure it really got distributed. I did reference some other, I've said a couple times tonight, this wasn't the end all. We've been doing several things since then. We actually did do it was still pretty high level, but it was getting a little bit lower. A dike raising and floodproofing assessment, where we were still using the same questionable data, but we actually looked at, and these were the exhibits I was thinking I could just blow up and put on a poster board that described and showed and estimated costs
Oh,
for doing these berms, doing these
Oh,
walls,
okay.
and things of that nature. We've looked into that. So how about if,
Next meeting.
yeah, I mean, we can certainly distribute as, I believe that this report was distributed to the committee sometime, so maybe let
Yeah,
me
yeah.
talk with,
Kim, maybe Kim.
yeah, I was gonna say Kim would probably be the best
Right,
source
okay.
and make sure we're not violating the FOIA or anything along those lines. But yeah, we have that report. It's, it's a fairly easy read. It's a little bit technical, but, I think that would probably help everybody understand. And now I'm kind of kicking myself, maybe not suggesting that before. I think it would help you all understand a lot more. And Kevin, I don't know, you had did you, I should know this, the 2011 or did you do anything subsequent that might help visualize, or was it more, I understand, put some surveyors out there and put some stakes in the ground and things?
We put stakes in the ground.
Okay, so it's not a,
To help the folks along the Strand visualize how high a berm would be. I sent my survey crew, and we put stakes, and we marked them at elevations, 6.5, and put them along the backs of the backyard.
I don't mean that, oh, I see what you're talking about. I mean, a good example that exists is the end of Packet Alley. Is that we have a berm on one side and we have a structure, a wall on the other. And they've been excellent in the
Oh, what
past.
we were looking at is something that was higher than.
Absolutely. I understand what you mean.
Yeah,
No.
and that way people could say, oh, well, and again, yeah, the river's a beautiful thing, except when it comes into your house. So,
Right.
and it just helped people understand what, the residents understand what we were talking about.
And what Rick's talking about is the other side of the Strand, on the other side of the Reed House property, there is a berm that those property owners did, and they connected it to a wall. And I think it's to the 8.5 feet, right? Which is what the dikes are.
Dikes are 10.
Are they?
Yes.
Wait,
I think they're 8.5.
Okay,
It says 8.5 in the book here. At this time, they were 8.5.
Yeah.
inflation, I'm sorry.
The berm out in Bull Hill is what? Is it 13 feet?
I thought it would be the same.
No, it's the same.
They're all built to
Same,
the
they're-
same
yeah.
elevation. So, yeah, an 8.5 is.
And we were trying to take it up to, some reasonable amount to get us some real benefits to the flood insurance, if nothing else.
Right.
So that might be in the vicinity.
And one of the challenges to raise, when you widen them, as Jeff, or David mentioned, you go higher, you gotta
Gotta
go
go
wider.
wider.
A lot wider.
When you go wider, especially when going into the river, wetland of underwater land impacts require permits from the state and the Army Corps of Engineers.
Yeah.
And, with sturgeon and, rare and endangered species, no, all this is a big deal, okay? It's a huge deal. And so, we were able to fast track the permits at 8.5 foot elevation, there's a lot of synchronicity that allowed things to happen, quickly. But this next go around, I think, would be more challenging and time consuming.
And can you do them flatter on the riverside? I mean, it seems like some of the dikes with the stones, I mean, they're not tapered.
That'd be
You
more like
need
a
to be able
wall,
to
maybe?
dissipate the force of the
You've gotta
wind.
have the
Oh, okay.
structural support, when you talk about putting in a wall, well, you've gotta have some sort of foundation
Okay,
to support that, because water is so powerful, and that's why the berms are wide and relatively
Okay.
gently sloped,
okay,
because, again.
The wave
hearsay,
action and-
Wave action
Right.
and water is just
right.
irresistible.
One of those huge stones, they're
Uh-huh.
expensive, but that's
Yeah, and
with the
that's,
smallest we
I'd
can.
say, and that's, that's a prime example of understanding water is, you look at those icebreakers that are out there, what they were. When I remember, when I was knee high to a grasshopper to now, and that one's practically underwater. So, it's pretty impressive.
Well, so why don't we, David, if you could come next month? But I personally would like a tour of a dike, so I could see, because I hear people talking about dikes, and I don't really, I see dike water, but I don't really know how it operates and how it was just constructed and all that. So if we could, maybe at 6 o'clock, meet you some at a dike, for those who are interested, or those who aren't interested, that's fine. I know Tish said she wanted to go. So,
No, I would, you wouldn't see anything in
But
an
would-
hour.
no,
You need
would
a half
not
a
be an hour,
day.
it's not enough time.
You need a
You
half
want
a
to go
day,
through low tide also.
yeah.
You have to find a time when you can see the dike.
It would be
Okay.
a
All right,
Saturday.
we'll find some other time. It doesn't necessarily have to be before the meeting. But I was hoping maybe Jeff, you could come to next meeting and talk about the dike situation and what you think of the possibility of raising the dikes and all of that stuff, and the maintenance is what Tim was talking about. Would that work for you? Is that okay? Okay, that'd be great. Does anybody else have any other suggestions for
I
next
would
meeting?
like to reiterate, I think we should work through 6.0.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We'll
Um,
take out,
Hopefully, we can do that as well, too.
There's no point in focusing on dikes and berms if we don't convince the community that it has to be done.
Mike,
Yeah, you're
Mike, what's your thought process? Maybe what we can do to help that process along is from now to the next meeting, maybe each of us can go through, prioritize what we think,
That sounds
we
right.
feel as though what the priority is,
Yeah.
and then come back as a committee and say, hey, this is how I prioritize it, how did you, and then collectively as a group, kind of work it from there. And I think it might be able to solve, what you're looking for in reference to prioritizing.
Sounds good.
Okay, anybody else have anything to say?
The only thing I just got one more thing, so
Sure.
is I spoke with, Paul Johnson, the mayor of Delaware City today.
Uh-huh.
And tomorrow, I'm gonna meet him in the afternoon and go over, what Delaware City has done from 1980s, since when they had their wall constructed, along the point to the refinery and where they are now. So we talked about it, and all, I'm kind of more of like a visual person as well. So tomorrow, I just want to let the
Great.
committee know that I'll be meeting with him and just seeing what they've done on where it was back then, what they've done to keep it up to where it is now. And in our talks today, it was pretty surprising that they don't worry about that branch canal. It's all about that Delaware River, because they don't have that wave action in the branch. They might see a little increase, believe it or not, but other than that, they worry about that wave action and the Delaware River side of thing versus that big branch
Like
canal,
David
because
said,
that's where they.
Right at the
they've had
bay
all the
too, right?
impact
At the,
and
sort of
stuff, so.
the mouth of the bay as well, right down there, aren't they? Or are they at Delaware City? No?
Fort
really?
Penn, I'm not
Fort
sure
Penn
what
is-
people call the bay, where the
Yeah,
river
Fort-
becomes the
Fort-
bay. I don't know if
I
any
mean,
of
that's
there's
down
common.
by Fort Penn,
Is
like
it-
south.
it?
Is very
south
commonly
of Fort-
accepted.
South of Fort Penn, down by, like, between power plant, Fort
Yeah.
Penn there,
Okay.
down like by Augustine Beach.
Yeah.
Just south of Augustine Beach, you get the river and the bay.
There's a monument, south of Cedar, was it Cedar
Cedar
Creek?
Creek. Mhm.
Yeah, they're actually it's stuck up. And I think the bay myself really begins at Delaware City. But that's just a navigational monument.
Guess it has something to do with the salinity of the water, is it, or is it the?
Well,
I don't
that,
know.
that changes,
Huh?
that changes.
Does it? Oh,
Yeah, you'll see when the waters are running down from the mountains,
Mhm.
Exactly.
the fresh water goes down further. But some night I'll bring it to your attention now, but some evening in August,
Mhm.
you'll start smelling salt water.
When there's a drought, the salt line moves up the river
Yes.
because there's less water coming in from the streams.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
To push the
Yeah.
salt line down.
I know, I talked to somebody at some organization that tries to, that monitors the salinity of the water up by Philadelphia.
Right.
And they've been very pleased with how much they've been managed to hold it back, I guess, you know.
Yeah,
so
well,
far.
Philadelphia, I believe, gets the water from the Schuylkill for that exact reason. I remember the drought might have been 10 years ago that the migration had gone. I think, believe it or not, Trenton's the first city.
Yeah, I
that
think he
pulls
said, yeah.
And Trenton was actually worried if the salt line got that high up. They didn't have a plan B. I mean, it was a real, this is a big deal. So,
Because when you run, when you go up the Delaware River, and I've done it a couple of times, like you were saying, Chief, you know, from Philly south, there's so much debris and, you know, but you go north of Philly and north of Trenton, and it is literally
Beautiful.
crystal clear.
Yeah.
It's, you wouldn't even recognize, it, you know,
yeah.
so it's.
Well, that's annoying.
Maybe we should move the whole. city.
Yeah, right. Yeah, oh, and
Well,
plus, Gail,
the
next-
jetty they
next
built
month
in
we'll also have come back, or
1957
two of you, three of you will have come back
actually
with your
changed
class,
That's
too.
true.
our town because we had ships that could dock at the wharf. The water was so deep there.
Right.
In 57, they put the jetty in to protect the mouth of the canal. And that changed the whole topography
It doesn't surprise me at all.
of the river.
Of course it would.
And that's when we get, 100 yards of sludge at low tide,
Yeah, of course it would.
So are we ready to adjourn for this month? Okay, I wanted to ask you, is the third Tuesday what we want to do, or is there another day that's better? I don't want to just assume that we're always going to be on the third Tuesday. If it's something else that somebody would prefer, like a Thursday or
I
You know,
think Tuesday's good.
Tuesday's fine. I just want to make sure that everybody's okay. All right, okay. So our next meeting will be what, like the 17th of May or something along those lines, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
Kevin.
you.
Kevin. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you.
Oh,
Nice to
thank
meet
you,
everybody.
Jeff.
Sure. Good evening.
Get all that.
Thank you.
A lot of technical, if you want me to review the minutes.
I probably
contact- Sorry, we took the first-
First,
No, we-